Katie Rodriguez clocks in at 11:13 p.m., and her hands shake as she swipes her badge. Not from fear. From the weight of a name that isn't hers. The badge reads Katie Rodriguez, registered nurse, Seattle General. Her scrubs are pressed in a way that screams military precision. Hospital employees don't crease their sleeves like that, don't fold their collar twice to check alignment. She adjusts it for the third time, pulling the fabric taut across her shoulders, feeling the ghost of combat gear that used to sit there. The fluorescent lights hum overhead, a sound like distant helicopters, and she forces herself to breathe through her nose. In through the nose. Out through the mouth. The way they taught her in Tikrit when incoming fire made the sky taste like copper and burning diesel. Her supervisor, Margaret, barely glances up from the assignment sheet. Pediatric floor. Night rotation. Room for 12 is your primary. Katie nods, moves, doesn't speak. Deferential. Quiet. The kind of new nurse who stays invisible and does the work nobody else wants at midnight. Her fingers find the dog tag under her scrubs, David's tag, the only piece of her husband that came home in a body bag marked Major Katie Rodriguez, deceased. She touches it like it's a rosary. Once. Twice. A small ritual that keeps her tethered to a version of herself that no longer exists officially, legally, or in any paperwork that matters. The pediatric floor smells like children's shampoo and antiseptic. The hallway stretches in both directions, fluorescent lights casting everything in surgical white. Room for 12 is at the end of the corridor, and before she reaches it, Katie hears the machines, ventilator, heart monitor, for pump creating a mechanical chorus that her body recognizes instantly. The sound of someone fighting to stay alive. She's heard this symphony in desert hospitals with blood on the floor and dust hanging in the air, and her hands move with automatic precision toward the door. 7-year-old Marcus Hartwell lies sedated in a hospital bed, his small frame barely disturbing the white sheets. Tubes run from his mouth to the ventilator at his bedside. And 4 line snakes up his arm, patched at 3 points where previous attempts left bruises. His chart sits on the foot of the bed, status post-sudden onset sensory neural hearing loss, cause unknown, pediatric neurology consult ordered, awaiting specialist evaluation. Katie reads the words and feels the weight of them. A child. Deaf. Scared somewhere beneath the sedation. But it's the man by the window who stops her breath. Admiral James Hartwell stands in dress whites, shoulders squared like his still-standing watch on a naval carrier. His face is lined in the way that comes from command decisions at 0300 hours, from signing papers that change lives. His hair is military white, his eyes are navy steel, and when he turns to look at her, she feels 8 years collapse into a single moment. She was in a courtroom in Tikrit, August 2016, temperature 118 degrees, standing before a formal hearing to answer charges of exceeding authority during Operation Red Dawn. The courtroom was a converted storage room with a single fan that didn't work. Caldwell was there as a character witness against her. But Hartwell was there in that chair, signing the court-martial recommendation that officially ended her assignment, her identity, her existence as Major Katie Rodriguez of Naval Special Warfare. He recommended civilian disappearance. A clean break. A ghost's protocol. He's looking at her face now, and she sees the moment his brain starts to work. Recognition flickering like a light switch someone keeps flipping. His eyes move from her face to her hands, steady hands that don't belong on a night shift nurse, to the way she moves toward his son's bed with the efficiency of someone who has stabilized casualties in active combat zones. You're the new pediatric nurse. Not a question. Yes, sir. Katie Rodriguez. The words come out soft, deferential, the voice of someone who has learned to take up as little space as possible. I'll be monitoring Marcus through the night shift. The Admiral studies her for 3 more seconds. She watches his jaw tighten. Then he turns back to the window, and whatever he almost recognized dissolves. His hearing aids are in a case on the bedside table. The doctors say it won't matter anymore, but he doesn't finish the sentence. He doesn't have to. Katie adjusts Marcus's blanket, checks the ventilator settings, examines the 4 access points with the practiced eye of someone who has done this in field hospitals under mortar fire. Everything is in place. Everything is documented. Everything is wrong. Dr. Caldwell arrives during rounds at 12:34 a.m., moving through the pediatric ward like he owns the air molecules around him. He carries an iPad tablet that glows with patient charts, and he doesn't acknowledge Katie when he enters the room. He addresses the Admiral instead. "How is Marcus tonight?" As if the child's nurse doesn't exist, as if she's part of the furniture. Katie steps back, gives space, makes herself smaller. This is the game. The new nurse learns the hierarchy first, speaks later if at all. Caldwell moves to the bedside, reviews the monitors, glances at the 4 set up with the dismissive efficiency of someone who has reviewed 10,000 patient charts and will review 10,000 more. He reaches for the medication log, checks the doses, and that's when Katie's eyes catch the tablet screen. 2 seconds. That's all the time her combat-trained brain needs. The dosage for Marcus's sedative, lorazepam, reads 0.4 milligrams per kilogram. The 4 bag hanging on the pole reads 0.04 milligrams per kilogram. The decimal point is shifted. The dosage in the chart is 10 times higher than what's actually being administered. And the anticonvulsant medication shows a similar discrepancy, each dose documented at concentrations that would sedate an adult, each one actually delivered at a pediatric fraction that wouldn't treat a child with a paper cut. She closes her eyes for one breath. Opens them. The thought forms in her mind like a bullet finding its target: this child is being systematically underdosed. Everything looks adequate, Caldwell says, and he's moving toward the door now, already forgotten her, already moving to the next patient, the next chart, the next room. Monitor his vitals every 2 hours. Page me if there are any changes. It isn't a request. It's a command delivered to someone he doesn't see. Katie's hand finds David's dog tag under her scrubs. She touches it once, hard enough to feel the sharp edge, hard enough to feel something besides the careful control she's learned in 8 years of being dead. She wants to speak. She wants to say the dosages don't match. She wants to point at the numbers and explain what she saw, what her eyes read in those 2 seconds, what her medical training recognized as something that could stop a child's heart. But Caldwell is already gone. She stands in the hospital room with Admiral Hartwell standing guard over his son, with Marcus Hartwell sedated and undermedicated and fighting for his life with dosages that wouldn't treat a migraine. The machines beep their steady rhythm. The ventilator wheezed its mechanical song. And Katie Rodriguez, the new nurse, the dead woman walking, the ghost in scrubs, says nothing. She adjusts Marcus's blanket instead. She checks the monitors. She makes notes in the chart with precise handwriting that belongs to someone who has documented field medicine in combat zones. And she begins to understand that she's been assigned to this room, to this child, to this admiral who signed her death warrant, for a reason she doesn't yet comprehend. But that wasn't the worst part. The worst part was realizing she was the only one who had seen the medication discrepancy. The only one who understood what those shifted decimal points meant. The only one, in that entire hospital, trained enough to know that Marcus Hartwell was being systematically poisoned. Dr. Caldwell didn't wait for her to sit down. There was no chair for her anyway. She stood by the glass wall of the morning briefing room while 12 doctors occupied the mahogany table, coffee cups and tablets arranged like place settings at a formal dinner. The fluorescent lights hummed overhead, casting everyone in that same institutional pallor. Katie cleared her throat. Dr. Caldwell, I noticed Marcus Hartwell's benzodiazepine dosage is 0.5 milligrams when the chart recommends 0.05 for his weight. The calcium channel blocker concentration doesn't match either. Caldwell set down his coffee with deliberate slowness. The cup made no sound against the saucer, the kind of practiced restraint that carries more weight than noise. Nurse Rodriguez, how long have you been practicing pediatric neurology? His voice moved like silk stretched over razor wire. I haven't, doctor. But during field medicine training, field medicine. He let the word sit there like something distasteful. The other doctors shifted. Two of them exchanged glances. Caldwell scrolled his tablet with theatrical precision. "According to your file, you trained at a community college night program in Spokane. 17 years ago, I was completing my fellowship at Johns Hopkins, where we treated cases that would make your community college curriculum look like a high school health class." He looked up from the tablet, smiling the way a predator smiles before it feeds. Perhaps clipboard Katie should focus on what she's qualified for. Emptying bedpans, taking vitals, and leaving the complex medical decisions to those of us with actual medical degrees. Laughter rippled through the room like a wave, not loud, but pervasive. The kind of synchronized mockery that only happens when a pack has identified weakness in the herd. Dr. Patricia Chen, who ran the ICU rotation, actually smirked. Dr. Morrison, who'd been friendly during orientation week, stared at his coffee. Caldwell leaned back in his chair, the leather creaking beneath him. "You're dismissed, Nurse Rodriguez." Katie took one measured breath through her nose. The smell of antiseptic and coffee grounds hung thick in the air. She could feel 12 pairs of eyes tracking her as she turned toward the door, could feel the weight of her own heartbeat, steady and controlled. Her spine straightened, not in anger, but in the specific posture of someone who had learned long ago that reaction was surrender. She didn't slam the door. She closed it with a soft click that somehow felt louder than a shout. The break room that afternoon smelled like burnt popcorn and the ghost of someone's sad lunch from 3 days prior. Katie sat at the small table with her container of leftover rice and beans, the plastic lid clouded from repeated microwaving. Sarah Chen, who'd been warned during orientation, entered with 2 other nurses. Their conversation died mid-sentence. Katie watched it happen in real time, the imperceptible nod, the coordinated gathering of lunch containers, the synchronized migration toward the hallway. Sarah didn't meet her eyes. The message was broadcast in a frequency that needed no words. Our association was contagion. By Thursday, Katie's assignment rotation had become a blur of shift changes designed to fracture any continuity with Marcus's care. Mornings to nights to swing shifts, each rotation pulled her further from the boy's medical baseline. She'd worked 12-hour shifts at the Ballard Air Base Trauma Center where continuity was a luxury they couldn't afford, where you treated the patient in front of you and trusted the next medic to remember what you'd written. But that was different. That was war. This was something else entirely. This was a man using institutional machinery the way she'd once used combat medicine. Caldwell appeared at the nurse's station Friday morning with the unit supervisor in tow. He positioned himself where Admiral Hartwell could hear from Marcus's doorway, where the morning shift would pause and listen. "We're reassigning you from room for 12, Caldwell announced, his voice carrying the false regret of a funeral director. "Your limited experience with complex neurological cases makes you unsuitable for Admiral Hartwell's son. I'm sure you understand." Katie's hands remained steady as she transferred Marcus's chart. Her vitals, blood pressure, heart rate, the invisible metrics that defined survival, all stayed within normal parameters. Only one tear slid down her cheek, and she wiped it without breaking eye contact with Caldwell, the motion so controlled it looked rehearsed. "Understood, Doctor. I'll document my concerns in writing." She'd learned 8 years ago that composure in the face of erasure was its own form of defiance. By week's end, a formal written warning had appeared on the unit board, positioned exactly where everyone clocking in would see it. The paper looked like an official condemnation, which was precisely the point. Nurse Cade Rodriguez, written warning, questioning attending physician protocols without appropriate credentials. Insubordination. Further violations will result in termination. Katie read it once while the day shift filed past, their eyes performing that careful dance of avoidance that happened when someone became officially untouchable. The tape securing it to the board was still sticky. She didn't touch it. Touching it would be acknowledgement, and acknowledgement was weakness. The graveyard shift came with a specific kind of isolation. Monday through Wednesday nights, Katie worked pediatrics with 2 CNAs who barely spoke English and had learned quickly not to speak at all in her presence. Caldwell had systematically reassigned every experienced nurse to other floors during her hours, a move so competent in its cruelty that it had the ring of military strategy. No witnesses. No allies. No one to verify her concerns if something went wrong. Katie checked on Marcus every hour despite being officially off his case, standing in his doorway where the monitor displays were visible from the hallway. Admiral Hartwell sat vigil in a chair that didn't fit his shoulders, a man built for command posts watching his son's chest rise and fall with mechanical regularity. He never acknowledged her. That was worse than mockery, worse than the laughter in the briefing room. On Thursday at 2,245 hours, Katie was reviewing charts at the nurse's station when she saw the Admiral emerge from room 412, shoulders bent under the specific weight that only a parent at a child's bedside carries. He headed toward the family lounge. His presence had been a constant gravitational force, and suddenly the pediatric ward felt unbalanced. Katie moved without deciding to move. Her body was older than her conscious mind, trained in reflexes that operated below thought. She slipped into room 412 and checked the medication drip with the practiced eye of someone who'd read for concentrations in candlelight and by headlamp, who understood that decimals were the difference between healing and death. The benzodiazepine bag was different from her last check. Changed. Someone, Caldwell, had adjusted the concentration, had shifted the decimal point back to the lethal dosage she'd flagged in the briefing. Her hands didn't shake as she photographed the 4 bag with her personal phone, didn't shake as she accessed an email account she'd been ordered 8 years ago never to use again. A dead drop address. A military channel that may or may not still be monitored by people who'd signed the official paperwork declaring her deceased. She typed 3 words, pediatric patient. Poisoned. Then she sent it and deleted the email trail like it had never existed. At 0300 hours the code blue alarm screamed from room 412. Katie was running before the sound finished registering in her conscious brain. The alarm cut through the silent ward like a siren in a graveyard, and she was moving through the hallway with the specific velocity of someone who'd already made peace with consequences. Marcus convulsed once, one sharp muscular contraction, and then the monitor flatlined. The shriek of the alarm became the only sound in the universe. She was alone. The CNAs hadn't responded yet, the crash cart was 30 seconds away, and Marcus's lips were turning the blue-gray color of a November sky over the Atlantic. Katie's hands began compressions, counting the rhythm at 120 beats per minute, the pressure just firm enough to feel vertebrae beneath her palms. 15 seconds. 30. She felt for a carotid pulse and found nothing but the faint flutter of her own fingers. The crash cart arrived with one of the CNAs pushing, a young man named David, ironically, though that was a detail her brain would process later. "What happened?" he gasped. "Call the attending. Push 1 mg epi-4 push. Get me a 14-gauge angiocath now." Her voice had dropped an octave. "No please. No apologies. Commands, not requests." The thing underneath her carefully constructed persona was surfacing, the thing that had kept 17 young Marines alive in Tikrit when everything else failed. The thing that knew how to make the kind of decisions that ended careers or saved lives with no middle ground. David didn't hesitate, he'd heard that voice before in crisis situations, and his body recognized authority regardless of what the hospital's organizational chart claimed. But Katie could see what the monitors were showing, what the other nurses wouldn't understand yet. Marcus's chest wasn't rising right. His sternum didn't rebound. There was fluid building around his heart, pericardial effusion probably triggered by the medication interaction Caldwell had deliberately orchestrated. The pressure was compressing his cardiac output. She had maybe 90 seconds before his brain started dying. Maybe 60 if she was unlucky. Katie looked at the crash cart. At the scalpel in the emergency surgical kit. At Marcus's grey face and the flat line that represented the absence of everything. The thing about field medicine was that hesitation was a choice. Hesitation meant you were choosing the patient's death over your own survival. She could hear David's voice from 8 years ago, the last thing he'd said to her in Tikrit before everything went dark: hesitation kills, Cout. Make the call. Katie picked up the scalpel. What happened next would change everything. The code blue alarm screamed from room 412 at 0300 hours on a Monday night that Katie had been dreading since Caldwell pulled her from Marcus's case. The sound split the silence like a blade. She was alone on Pediatrics, truly alone. Caldwell had rotated every experienced nurse off her shifts, a surgical precision to his cruelty that impressed her even now, through the adrenaline surge. The CNA assigned to help her was in room 408, 3 rooms away, checking vitals on a sleeping 6-year-old. Katie was it. Just her and a 7-year-old boy whose heart had stopped beating. She moved before thinking. Muscle memory took over, the same instinct that had carried her through a dozen collapsed buildings in Tikrit where children lay buried under concrete and rebar. The monitors screamed in harmony. Flat line. No rhythm. Nothing. Marcus's small chest rose and fell once more from the ventilator, mechanical and useless, his lungs pumping air through a dead heart. Katie's hands were already on his sternum, finding the right landmarks through muscle and bone. 2 fingers below the left nipple. Perfect position. Compression started at exactly 100 beats per minute, her shoulders driving down with the force that kills ribs in adults but saves children. The compressions were violent. They had to be. Marcus's tiny frame barely moved on the mattress. The monitors continued their accusation. Flat line. Still nothing. Blood wasn't moving. Oxygen wasn't reaching his brain. For minutes. That's all she had. For minutes before the damage became permanent. Before the boy in front of her became someone else entirely. Code team, she called out, her voice carrying the authority of someone used to giving orders that saved lives. The CNA appeared in the doorway within seconds, his eyes wide, his training kicking in. Push 1 amp epi, for root, now. Katie didn't stop compressions. 100 beats. Push. 100 beats. Push. The monitor showed Marcus's heart still refusing to participate in its own survival. 2 minutes gone. The 4 went in on the CNA's second attempt, his hands shaking slightly. The medication went in. The monitor spiked for one hope-filled moment. Flat again. Katie's mind was working in layers now, the conscious part counting compressions while the deeper part, the part trained in field surgery, was analyzing why a child with a functioning medication regimen would code. She'd seen the chart. She'd seen Caldwell's changes. And in that moment, with her hands on Marcus's sternum, she understood what those decimal point shifts meant. The medication wasn't just wrong. It was creating conditions that would stop a small heart from beating. Creating conditions for fluid to accumulate around the pericardium, the sac holding his heart. Pericardial tamponade. That's what was happening. That's why compressions weren't working. His heart was being crushed not by the lack of rhythm but by the pressure of fluid around it. I need a scalpel, Katie said. The words came out flat. They weren't a request. The CNA stared at her for half a second, and in that half second, Katie saw him calculating protocols and regulations and the fact that a nurse, just a nurse, shouldn't be asking for surgical instruments. Now, she said, and the tone of that word, the absolute certainty in it, made him move. The scalpel was in her hand within seconds. Katie didn't hesitate. She positioned the blade below Marcus's sternum at a 45-degree angle and went in smooth, the muscle memory of 1,000 training scenarios and a dozen actual emergency thoracotomies in the field taking over completely. This wasn't authorized. This violated every protocol Seattle General had written. But protocols were written by people who had never watched a child die from something that could be fixed in 10 seconds with a knife. The blade found the pericardial sac. Blood and amber fluid, the fluid that had been slowly crushing Marcus's heart for hours, maybe longer, drained into the basin the CNA shoved underneath. The amount was alarming. 300 milliliters at least. Too much. Way too much. The monitors shifted. One blip. Then another. Then the rhythm came back, stuttering at first, uncertain, then establishing itself into something that resembled a heartbeat. 110. Then 120. then settling into something stable. Marcus's eyes fluttered. The pupils that had been blown wide and unresponsive suddenly constricted. His body tensed against the ventilator's breath. For minutes and 37 seconds since the alarm. Close. Dangerously close. But he was breathing. His heart was pumping. The fluid that had been killing him was in a basin on the floor. Katie worked for 4 more minutes. Clear the airway. Establish proper for access through an uncompromised line. Push 100 micrograms of fentanyl for sedation so Marcus wouldn't fight the ventilator. Her hands moved with the steady precision of someone who had done this before in conditions infinitely worse than a sterile hospital room. Blood dried on her scrubs. On her gloves. Tacky. Still warm. The ventilator's rhythm steadied. Monitors showed vital signs that were heading toward survivable. Toward safe. And then the footsteps arrived. Dr. Caldwell entered the room with 2 residents trailing behind him like remoras following a great white shark. He stopped in the doorway. His eyes took in the scene with methodical precision, Marcus breathing on his own. Katie covered in blood from chest to knees. The scalpel on the instrument tray. The drained pericardial fluid in the basin. The room went so quiet you could hear the fluorescent lights hum with their electric hunger. Caldwell didn't yell. He didn't rage or throw something against the wall. His face simply became very still, very calm, the dangerous calm of a man holding a loaded weapon and finally seeing his target. His smile appeared like a predator recognizing prey. "Everyone out except Nurse Rodriguez," he said. The residents moved. The CNA moved. The door closed. It was just Katie and Caldwell and Marcus's unconscious body and the evidence of everything Katie had just done arrayed on the instrument tray like an indictment. Caldwell took out his phone. Not to call. To document. He photographed the scalpel from 3 angles. The blood. Katie's hands. Marcus's chest wound. Each photo a meticulous record of what she had done, careful to capture the evidence with forensic clarity. Katie watched him work with the same calm she had used to perform the pericardiocentesis. There was no point in defending herself. The facts were visible. A nurse had performed an unauthorized surgical procedure. His pericardial sac was filling with fluid, Katie said. Her voice was steady. He had 90 seconds before complete tamponade. His heart was being crushed. "I understand the mechanism, Nurse Rodriguez," Caldwell said. He lowered the phone. "But what you just performed wasn't an emergency intervention. It was a surgery. Unauthorized. Without physician supervision. On a Navy Admiral's son." He paused, and his smile widened slightly. "You have no idea how much you've helped me." He made the first phone call in the hallway outside room 412, standing where Katie could see him through the window. Hospital administrator. The second call came 30 seconds later. State Medical Board. The third call, the one that made his voice shift into something almost respectful, came 2 minutes after that. Admiral Hartwell. Personal line. In each conversation, Caldwell described what had happened with surgical precision, each detail positioned to maximize damage. A nurse. Performing surgery. On the Admiral's child. Unauthorized. Unsupervised. Reckless. By 0500 hours, Katie's badge was deactivated. Security escorted her through the parking lot as the rain started to fall, the kind of rain that came down like it had a purpose, soaking through her blood-stained scrubs. She didn't speak. Didn't resist. Didn't let the security officers see anything in her face except compliance. The rain hammered the parking lot like applause for the end of something, and Katie walked toward her car understanding that Caldwell had just destroyed everything she'd built in the past 8 months of civilian life. Saved a child's life. Lost her career. The dead major, back from the grave for 4 minutes, was being buried again. Caldwell made the calls at 03 for 7 hours. First to the hospital board chairman. then the State Medical Licensing Committee. Then Admiral Hartwell's personal line, a number that shouldn't have been in a civilian doctor's phone at all. His voice was steady through all three conversations. Professional. Measured. He described Katie as reckless, unstable, dangerous. He had photographs. Security footage. Witness statements from orderlies who didn't exist. By the time the sun started bleeding orange across the Raleigh skyline, he'd painted her as a vigilante nurse who'd performed an unauthorized surgical procedure on a pediatric patient without consent, without training, without any authority whatsoever. The hospital administrator arrived at 05 for 5 hours with security. 2 uniformed officers whose job was simple: escort the new nurse from the building and deactivate her badge before she could access any more patient records or equipment. Katie wasn't at her apartment. She'd driven straight from the hospital parking lot into the pre-dawn darkness, her hands finally shaking on the steering wheel, the first tremor she'd allowed herself in 8 years. The city blurred through rain-soaked glass as she merged onto Interstate 40 heading south, away from Seattle General, away from Raleigh, away from everything she'd built. The cemetery was 2 hours of highway and silence. The headstone was exactly as she remembered it, weathered granite, rain-soaked, the inscription carved deep enough to catch your fingers if you weren't careful. Major David Rodriguez, 1st Special Forces, Navy Cross, Silver Star, 1983 to 2016. No loving husband. No beloved father. Just the rank, the unit, the medals. The way the Army carved granite for warriors who'd been officially erased. Katie knelt in the mud wearing scrubs stiff with Marcus Hartwell's blood, her professional suit abandoned in the car because she couldn't bear the irony of getting dressed up to report to a hearing that no longer existed. The rain soaked through the fabric at her knees, mixing with 8 years of tears she'd held locked behind her ribs. "I saved him," she whispered. The words came out fractured, each one a separate admission. "I saved the son of the man who buried us both." The rain intensified. Thunder rolled across the cemetery like distant artillery. Her fingers traced the carved letters, David's name, David's rank, and muscle memory tried to kick in, tried to catalog the sensations, the temperature drop, the barometric pressure. Combat training dies hard. Even here, even now, her body was still reading tactical data. The Admiral, she continued, her voice breaking, the one who signed the court-martial papers, who declared you KIA and me non-existent. His boy was 7 years old and dying, and I saved him. She pressed her forehead against the cold stone. I finally surfaced, David. After all this time hiding, working night shifts in hospitals where nobody asks questions, I used the training. I remembered the procedures you taught me during those operations in Fallujah, Sanjin Valley, all of it. And now the erasure will be complete. The rain hammered down. It came sideways, driven by wind that smelled like distant lightning and turned earth. She didn't move. Soldiers don't seek shelter from weather, they operate through it. They'll take my nursing license, she said, each word precise as a surgical incision. They'll investigate and find out I don't exist. That Katie Rodriguez's credentials are built on a dead woman's social security number because Major Katie Rodriguez was declared killed in action in Tikrit 8 years ago. Her hands moved across the granite, leaving bloody fingerprints that the rain immediately washed away. I'm sorry I broke cover. I'm sorry I failed you again. She stayed there as the rain softened to drizzle, as the sky fractured with grey light, as the cemetery filled with the sound of mourning birds and distant traffic. Her knees were soaked through. Her hands were numb. The blood under her fingernails was no longer Marcus's, it was the past, finally catching up, finally dragging her under. The drive back to Raleigh took 2 hours. She pulled into the Seattle General parking lot at 0900 hours and didn't turn off the engine. Just sat there in the rain, watching staff arrive for the morning shift, knowing her badge was already deactivated, knowing her name was already being scrubbed from the system. By afternoon she'd be a legal ghost again, not the nurse named Katie, but not Major Katie either. Nothing. The space between identities where erasure happened. What she didn't know was that Admiral Hartwell was inside the hospital at that exact moment, sitting in his son's room and watching Marcus breathe. The boy's eyes were open now, tracking movement, following his father's face with the concentration of a 7-year-old whose neural pathways had been rewired by someone who understood combat medicine well enough to know where to cut. Hartwell was holding a tablet. The hospital administrator had provided security footage at his request, footage of that last hour before dawn, before Katie had been escorted out, before everything changed. He played it again, frame by frame. Her hands moving with precision that doesn't come from nursing school. The way she'd called for a scalpel without hesitation. The way her voice had dropped into a register he recognized from briefing rooms and operation centers. He paused on a frame where her face was visible, half-masked by blood spatter and adrenaline, and compared it to a classified file he hadn't opened in 8 years. A file stamped deceased. A file about a special operations combat medic who'd extracted a high-value target from Tikrit and was never supposed to be seen again. Angel. That was her call sign. That was the name whispered in debriefing rooms when officers wanted to know how one person could move through a firefight and extract an asset without losing a single operator. His hand started shaking. He made one phone call to a number that civilians shouldn't have, a number that connected to a JSOC operations desk in Washington, and spoke 3 words into the receiver: "Angel is alive." The silence on the other end confirmed everything. Caldwell was pacing his apartment when the FBI liaison called. Not a request. A statement. A military hearing convening at Seattle General at 0900 hours the following morning. The hospital board, the state medical committee, Admiral Hartwell himself demanding an official review. Caldwell had prepared for this. He'd anticipated that the nurse might try to fight back, might claim she was acting in the patient's best interest, might invoke some noble instinct to save a child's life. He had his defense scripted. He had witnesses arranged. He had photographs and documentation and a narrative that would hold up under scrutiny. Just a reckless nurse. Just an overstep in judgment. Just an isolated incident with a panicked employee who'd seen a child in distress and acted without authorization. He didn't know he was already finished. He didn't know that federal investigators had already traced the medication discrepancies back through his computer logs. 47 pediatric cases. Systematic alterations that generated kickbacks from unapproved pharmaceutical trials. 3 years of falsified records. The kind of case that ended careers, prison sentences, the kind of case that made examples out of people who thought they were untouchable. The rain continued through the night. It hammered against windows, turned gutters into rushing water, made the city sound like it was drowning from the inside out. By morning, the storm had passed, leaving everything washed clean and vulnerable. The kind of morning where secrets don't stay buried. The kind of morning where hidden things surface. And somewhere in a cemetery 2 hours away, a dead major's headstone was dripping with rainwater, and a woman who'd been officially erased was driving back toward the only place left that might remember her name. Not as a nurse. Not as Katie Rodriguez with borrowed credentials. As something else entirely. As someone who'd spent 8 years learning how to disappear and now had to learn, all over again, how to exist. The military hearing convenes at 0900 hours in Seattle General's main conference room, the space transformed into something formal and official. Admiral James Hartwell sits at the center of a long mahogany table, his uniform pressed with the precision of 30 years command, flanked by 2 officers in navy dress blues. Dr. Caldwell occupies the opposite end, his suit tailored perfectly, his confidence radiating like heat from a closing furnace door. He'd prepared his defense carefully, documentation of Katie's unauthorized surgical procedure, testimony from colleagues about her questionable judgment, statements from hospital administrators about protocol violations. The board members, 3 physicians, 2 hospital administrators, 1 legal counsel, lean forward with clipboards and skeptical expressions. Caldwell speaks first, his voice steady and reasonable. This nurse, regardless of her background, performed an emergency procedure without attending physician authorization. He pauses for effect. The hospital has strict hierarchies for patient safety. If we allow nurses to operate outside these frameworks, we invite chaos. The legal counsel nods slightly. Caldwell presses forward. She may have good intentions, but good intentions don't excuse protocol violations. The child survived, yes, but not because of her actions. Marcus Hartwell survived because he received proper care afterward. Her procedure was reckless. A board member glances at Admiral Hartwell. "Admiral, do you have a response?" But before Hartwell can speak, the hearing room door opens. Marcus Hartwell walks in holding his father's hand. The 7-year-old boy moves with the careful deliberation of someone discovering his own legs. He shouldn't be walking at all, not after a catastrophic cardiac event, not after the doctors told his father to prepare for death. But Marcus walks, his small hand gripping his father's larger one, his eye scanning the room with the sharp intelligence of a child who learned early that the world moves in patterns you either read or die. He wears a navy t-shirt, small and white, with Naval Hospital printed across the back. The room shifts. The legal counsel lowers his clipboard. A board member's jaw tightens. Marcus approaches his father, squeezes his hand, and signs a single word with both hands raised. Admiral Hartwell's eyes go wet. His voice cracks like a radio transmission breaking through static. He says Tangel. The fluorescent lights buzz overhead, indifferent to the weight suddenly pressing down on everyone. Caldwell's face loses color. The Admiral stands, and the room understands before anyone speaks that the hearing has fundamentally changed. "This child," Admiral Hartwell says, his voice now carrying the weight of command decisions made in war zones where people died based on what he chose to say, was given up on by 12 doctors. 12. They told me his condition was irreversible, that the medication regimen was appropriate given his diagnosis. Major Katie Rodriguez read a dosage discrepancy on a tablet screen for 2 seconds and understood what 12 physicians with decades of experience missed. He pauses. The silence sits like pressure. She didn't miss it because she's reckless. She didn't miss it because she lacks respect for protocol. She understood it because she has spent her career saving lives under conditions where a decimal point error means body bags. Major? The word hangs in the air. Katie remains absolutely still in her chair, her posture unchanged, her face composed with the terrifying calm that comes from having already survived the worst. But her hands, folded on the table, grip just slightly tighter. Commander William Price walks into the hearing room. He's a SEAL team leader with the bearing of a man who's rappelled out of helicopters and into gunfire, whose eyes have processed threat assessment in 40 languages. He carries a file folder and moves with the economical precision of someone whose profession requires that every motion count. He approaches the board table. "Major Katie Rodriguez," Price says, and he says it like a name being restored to an honors wall, served with the Naval Special Operations Command's Task Force Dagger for 12 years. 3 tours to combat zones. He opens the file. Bronze Star with Valor. He pauses. The legal counsel writes the notation. 2 silver stars. Another pause, longer this time. Purple Heart. He lets that land. Another Purple Heart. The board members exchange glances. Caldwell's hands grip the table edge. Navy Cross recipient. The words fall like an execution order. Major Rodriguez was extracted from active duty and reassigned to civilian status following Operation Blackthorn, a high-value target extraction that, due to its classification level, cannot be discussed in this room or any other civilian medical facility. Price closes the file. What can be said is that she sacrificed everything for mission completion. The Navy doesn't decorate nurses for protocol adherence. The Navy decorates soldiers for saving lives under impossible circumstances. The hearing room has gone so quiet you could hear the rain outside hammering the windows like distant applause. The FBI liaison stands. She's a woman in her 50s with the bearing of someone who has spent 2 decades following money and secrets through institutional labyrinths. She doesn't carry a file folder, she carries a tablet. Major Katie Rodriguez was declared killed in action on March 14, 2016, following the extraction of a high-value target whose security classification remains at the SAP level. SAP, Special Access Program. The words mean nothing to the civilians in the room except that they signify something beyond their clearance. Her death was documented, funeral services were held, and her family received appropriate military honors. She looks at Admiral Hartwell. You signed the authorization for this, Admiral, on direct orders from JSOC leadership. Hartwell nods once. Major Rodriguez was then reassigned, with her consent, into permanent civilian status, requiring her to completely sever all documented military affiliation. She was not permitted to carry military identification, not permitted to acknowledge her service, not permitted to access any resources related to her former position. She was, in effect, erased from the record. The Liability Council's eyes widened slightly. For the past 8 years, Major Rodriguez maintained this civilian identity flawlessly. She worked as a pediatric nurse in a hospital in Portland, then transferred here. She reported the discrepancies in Marcus Hartwell's medication dosages through encrypted military channels that had been specifically set up for her use in precisely this scenario. The FBI liaison turns to the legal counsel. Those encrypted reports triggered an immediate investigation by Naval Criminal Investigative Service. Within 36 hours, we identified Dr. Caldwell's off-label pharmaceutical trial, his falsification of patient records, and his systematic alteration of Marcus Hartwell's medications to match his experimental protocol. The alterations would have resulted in cardiac arrest within 4 to 6 days. She pauses. Major Rodriguez identified this discrepancy in real time and prevented that death. Caldwell stands. His chair makes a sound like a small animal dying. "This is insane," he says, his voice no longer steady. "She performed an authorized surgery. She violated federal, the FBI liaison doesn't even look at him. Dr. Caldwell, you are under federal indictment for 47 counts of medical fraud, child endangerment, falsification of medical records, and involuntary manslaughter. Your arrest warrant was signed 4 hours ago by the United States District Court. You'll need to accompany officers to the federal detention facility in Winston-Salem." She looks at the door. 2 federal agents step inside, not ceremoniously, just matter-of-factly, the way agents step inside when they know exactly how the scene will conclude. "You have the right to remain silent," one of them begins. Caldwell's carefully constructed identity collapses in real time. His expensive suit suddenly looks like costume jewelry. His precise haircut looks like desperation. He opens his mouth, closes it, and lets the agents lead him out. The room goes absolutely still. The legal counsel looks at Admiral Hartwell. "I assume the hospital's liability," Hartwell cuts him off. "The hospital's liability is settled. Major Rodriguez will be compensated for her wrongful termination, and her professional credentials will be fully restored." He looks at the remaining board members. "Is there anything else?" "There isn't." 6 months later, Dr. Caldwell pushes a security desk chair back to its position in the basement level of Seattle General. The night shift stretches ahead of him, 11 hours of checking badges, validating parking passes, documenting entry and exit times. His federal trial awaits sentencing in February. His medical license is revoked permanently. His 40-year reputation has been erased with the same efficiency he once used to erase his patient's dignity. He wears a gray security uniform with his name tag facing down. He avoids eye contact with everyone. When someone approaches the desk, he looks at their badge, not their face. That's how he gets through each shift, by never acknowledging the specific people walking past him, by treating them as processing requirements rather than human beings, by becoming as invisible as he once made his victims. Major Katie Rodriguez walks through Seattle General's main entrance at 07 for 5 hours in navy dress whites, her uniform tailored perfectly, her ribbons and medals arranged in proper order. The dress whites are sharp white trousers with a navy blouse, the service dress hat with the navy insignia, the appearance of a person fully restored to existence. Staff members stop and stare. Some salute without conscious thought, the spine-straight instinct of recognizing rank and service. Others pull out phones, capturing the image of the woman who saved an admiral's son, who held a child's life in her hands and refused to let go. She walks past the night security desk without glancing at Caldwell's direction. She moves through the hospital with the bearing of someone who no longer needs to disappear. Her new office sits on the pediatric floor, the same hallway where she was escorted out 6 months ago. On her desk, a computer terminal displaying the Pediatric Combat Medicine Training Program curriculum, diplomas on the wall, photographs of her training classes arranged chronologically, and in the center, a single dog tag on a broken chain next to a framed photograph of Marcus Hartwell signing "Thank you" with both hands raised toward the sky. The dog tag belonged to Major David Rodriguez, her husband, who died in Tikrit 8 years ago. She'd buried him in a closed casket, burying also every piece of herself that wasn't required for survival. She'd carried the broken chain in her pocket every day since, a weight that reminded her she was still alive. Now the chain sits in daylight, acknowledged, witnessed, no longer a secret she held alone in the dark. Admiral Hartwell appears in her doorway at 1600 hours, Marcus at his side. The boy runs to Katie and hugs her, his small arms around her neck, his body solid and warm and alive because she made the choice that cost her everything. She signs to him, "You're welcome, warrior." Marcus signs back, "You were braver." Admiral Hartwell extends his hand. "Major Rodriguez, I owe you an apology 8 years overdue. I signed papers declaring you dead because I was told it was necessary for national security. I didn't know then what you'd sacrificed. I didn't understand what it cost you." Katie shakes his hand, her grip firm and steady. "You gave me the gift of disappearing, sir. It let me grieve David without the military watching. And you gave me the gift of coming back. You could have left me buried." That night, Katie stands in her apartment holding David's dog tag, looking at the photo on her phone of Marcus signing with both hands raised. She understands now what her husband meant in his last letter, written the day before Tikrit. True class is what you do when the lights go out. When nobody's watching, when there's no glory, when it costs you everything. She clips the dog tag back around her neck where it belongs, turns out the light, and for the first time in 8 years, she sleeps without the weight of erasure crushing her chest. The chain no longer feels like a burden. It feels like a tether to the person she is, the person she always was, the person the world finally sees. Thank you for watching. If you've been underestimated by someone who didn't know your true value, please subscribe to see more stories like this. Like and comment, what would you have done in Katie's position? What would it take to come back from being erased?